Facebook and we're live on YouTube. I will play the theme music and let everybody in.
Great. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Scuttlebutt for Monday, August 19th. I'm Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. So great to see you all here tonight. And I had a little week off last week, so it's great to be back in the saddle tonight and see everybody's shining faces again. And with me, as always, is co-host Todd. Thank you for flying the ship last week.
Yeah, you bet. And my face is definitely shiny because it's hot here in my attic and humid.
And humid.
I'm shiny.
And joining us also, I know, are several people. And I think Henry Shepke's in the room.
Yes.
And we just want to say thank you to Henry because, we have our special guest tonight, Mikael Cook. We're going to be talking about digital Dunkirk and the fall of Kabul and a lot of things that happened there. Dave Seaver, you have a lot to talk about with that as well tonight. But Henry Shepke, our intern, we got to see him. He came through Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago. And we finally, after how many years has it been? 4 years? I think we've finally,
it's
for
been 4 years.
He's finally was able to make it to Pittsburgh with his dad. There's Henry. Hey, Henry, I'll ask you to unmute. You made it back
Hi,
to
how are you
Madison.
doing?
Good. You made it back to Madison, all right.
Yep.
And you were driving some of this, weren't you?
Yep.
There's us
Yeah,
with
I just got my license.
That's right. There's us with Don, your dad, your brother. We went down to the stadium. You guys got to see a ball game that night, despite the rain. You got to hang out for at least a little bit of the game, right?
Yeah, we had to leave early, but we were able to see a few innings. So,
and we were happy to have you, Todd. It was great to meet Henry.
I've known Henry for 4 years. I've known Henry since the beginning of pandemic when we started our Veterans Breakfast Club online here on these Monday nights and on Thursday nights. And Henry was this kid from Madison, Wisconsin, who joined us. And he was enthusiastic about veterans. He was enthusiastic about the conversation. He wrote World War II veterans letters. He collected autographs. And here we are 4 years later, and I still know Henry. And Henry wrote an article for our magazine. But it was only 2 weeks ago I got to meet him in person because he and his father and his twin brother came to Pittsburgh on their tour of Major League Baseball stadiums. And the big surprise for me was how tall Henry is. I mean, he towers over me. Oh my gosh. He went from being a 12-year-old little kid to a 16-year-old big kid. And so it was really great to see him. It was also great to have Henry come to our breakfast. We had a breakfast in Beaver County the next morning, and Henry and his family came. And it was wonderful to, introduce him to the 120 people who were there. And what was so neat is I kind of, after the breakfast, I looked around and I saw people asking to have their pictures taken with Henry because because they know him from these years of these Zoom programs. And here's Henry with his twin brother Owen, his father Jeff. Here's Guy Prestia, 102-year-old 45th Infantry Division veteran. Here's Warren Goss, 99-year-old D-Day veteran, and then Rick Weber, our 101st Airborne veteran from Vietnam. Very cool to have all of them together and to have Henry there in person. So Henry, thank you so much for making the effort to get here and to meet me and meet Sean and Don Nemchek, who very kindly took us out to lunch, and so many of our other veterans.
It was an honor to meet all of you. So I was happy to be able to finally see you all in person because like you said, we've seen each other on Zoom for 4 years, but never met.
Exactly.
Well, that breakfast was in Beaver, and our guest tonight has some history in Beaver, PA, where I originally am from, where I grew up. Mikael, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much, guys. This is a treat. And thank you for everybody that logged on to hear this story. Looking forward to it.
You are the author of Life and Death at Abbey Gate. And I should say, probably up front, is that you were not physically at Abbey Gate,
Correct.
but you were there digitally, emotionally, spiritually, just about any way you can be, but physically. And we're going to get to that part of the story as soon as we can. But let's start back. You said your dad was from Beaver. For the people here, Western PA, what does that date back to?
Yeah, so Steelers fan here, first and foremost, so I should probably say that. But yeah, my dad grew up in Beaver. My family, for 5 generations back, lived in Beaver. Came straight from Germany and moved to Beaver, Pennsylvania, and they had a couple businesses there. Cook Anderson Company is one of them, if anybody in Beaver is familiar with that name. So they had a lumber yard, and yeah, so my dad grew up there, and then ended up moving to Michigan later on in life, where I was born.
And you grew up, you were in sports, you were in hockey. You moved out to, was it California for school, and decided that wasn't for you. You decided to join the Army.
Yeah, so yeah, grew up in Michigan. Like everyone in Michigan, I played hockey, like you said. So grew up playing team sports, which I think was like, one of the entrances into the military. Is later on in life, I ended up missing kind of that team atmosphere, being part of something bigger than myself, right? So grew up in Michigan. Went to college here at Eastern Michigan University, played club hockey. After that, after graduating, I moved out to California, and I was out there for 5 years. And kind of like I said, that was the point where I really started missing something in my life, and I was doing some exploration, not sure, what it was that I thought I wanted. And that's when I picked up with an Army recruiter out there in California.
Was it specifically Army you were looking at, or is that like, that's where you went, or did you Navy or Air Force, anything else like sort of catch your eye?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those classic stories of going to see the Marine recruiter, and then just getting pulled into a different part of the building. So originally I wanted to join the Marine Corps. They wanted me to start as, I believe, an E2, if I remember correctly. Since I had my college degree, the Army pulled me in and they said, hey, you can start as an E4 if you want. So that made my decision a little bit easier. So I ended up going Army.
And you get into Army. Did you get that camaraderie that you spoke about? Did that start immediately, or did it take some time?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because I was, let's see, I want to say I turned 27 or 28 at basic training. So like I was an old guy there, right? So going through basic training at that age is very interesting. But yeah, I made some amazing friends right off the bat. Some guys I still talk to this day. Some guys I ran into in Afghanistan, actually, that I went to basic training with, which was crazy. But for sure, that brotherhood is just built in, right? From day one, you show up at your unit and you know that those are your guys. So lifelong friends for sure.
And you mentioned in the book that it took a while for you guys to be deployed to Afghanistan, and maybe the good Jeopardy. We like to do Jeopardy here on VBC. The good Jeopardy question for everybody is, I'm going to start with the question, so maybe not Jeopardy, but what is the PNN? Can anybody tell me what the PNN is? Dave, I feel like you would know what the PNN is, unless it's only an Army term.
Might be different in each branch.
No
Nobody.
hands? Mike?
Yeah, private news network. It's just like the most unreliable source of news anywhere in the country. Just the rumor mill that goes on in any military unit. That's 90% fake information.
So you caught wind through the PNN that you guys might be deployed.
Yep. Yeah. So let's see. I joined in 2017. 2019 is when we got our deployment orders. So I found out probably about 2 months before deployment that we were going to be deploying. We didn't know exactly where we were going. We knew we were going to Kuwait first, and then would get pushed out somewhere from there. So summer of 2019, we left for Kuwait. We were there for, I want to say, about a week, just doing a little workup, and then we forward deployed to Afghanistan.
And you mentioned arriving in Afghanistan that every nerve ending in your body felt alive. Can you describe that a bit for me?
Yeah, I mean, so anybody that's been to Kuwait or Iraq or anywhere in that general area, summers are just so hot, right? I mean, it was like 120, 125 degrees. So being there for a week was rough. So then flying into, the mountainous Afghanistan, I remember walking off the plane in the middle of the night. It's probably 3 a.m, and it's like that cool mountain air hits your face. And right as I was walking off the tarmac, some fighter jets took off right next to me, and it was just the coolest feeling ever. So I was just pumped to be there.
What was your MOS?
So I started as a 12 whiskey, so I was an engineer.
And excuse my ignorance, but an engineer, like, do you have a specialty?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess yeah, engineer is a pretty broad term. There's all kinds of engineers. There's vertical engineers, horizontal engineers, bridge engineers, combat engineers. So I was a vertical engineer. So we focused mainly on like building up whatever, building up security or building buildings or anything that needed to be built is what vertical engineers did.
And did that, and for the reason of being a vertical engineer, is that how you ended up at your base?
Yep. So we flew into Bagram, like pretty much everyone does. I was there for about a week, just kind of waiting on to see where I was going to end up going. My platoon got pushed up to northern Afghanistan. Mazar Sharif is the town. It's the second biggest city in Afghanistan, I believe. So we were up on a NATO base there called Camp Marmel, which was run by the Germans. And we had a few different tasks up there. And that's really where the book starts, right? Because that's where I meet these two guys, the two main characters in my book, Abdul and Mohammed, who were Afghan nationals, and they had access to the base and they worked with us every single day. And really they were contractors. So their task was to get us whatever we needed to accomplish our mission. So as engineers, we're constantly building stuff. We can go through the traditional military routes of getting materials like lumber or anything, but that can take weeks, it can take months, or you can find guys like Abdul Mohammed that can find anything within like 2 hours, right, and bring it right to you. So they were kind of like
how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean they were very skilled, and they knew the area, and they had a ton of connections everywhere. So no matter what we needed, they were able to provide for us very quickly. Mm-hmm. So it just started as a working relationship. But they were just great guys. They're about my age, in their mid 30s at this point, and just quickly turned into a friendship. They took really good care of me. They would bring me home cooked meals from their wives, just like gorgeous lamb and rice and just amazing food, because they knew what I was eating wasn't very great. And for anybody that's been deployed, food's okay when you're deployed, depending on where you are, but it's not great. So yeah, just very quickly turned into just a great friendship. So I was pretty sad when I ended up leaving Camp Marmel to go down to my next post was Camp Moorhead, a little bit south of Kabul, which was a Afghan National Army training camp. So that's where they train their commandos. So we had a small contingency force there of mainly just trainers. So just showing these Afghans, teaching them up on everything they needed to know. So yeah, when I left Camp Marmel, I remember going up to Abdul Mohammed and I gave him a hug. They surprised me with a little gift of a traditional Afghan outfit. And we said goodbye, because it was kind of like we both knew this is the last time we're ever going to see each other. And I'll never forget it. I made a small, like, joking comment, like, hey, hope to see you in Michigan sometime. Hope you guys can come visit sometime, knowing that was never going to happen. And looking back on that now, it's quite funny. But we'll get into that.
So, I want to talk a bit about them. So your interactions over the course of that year, did they spoke English? Did they speak through an interpreter?
They spoke pretty good English, enough to get by. Yeah, they certainly weren't fluent and couldn't read or write in English, but their English was passable. So we were able to have conversations without interpreters.
And why were they helping us?
I mean, it was a way for them to support their family. A very large majority of people in Afghanistan work for the U.S. in some form of another, or they used to. Obviously, that doesn't happen anymore now that the Taliban's in complete control. But yeah, in the heyday when we were all there was a large majority of the population worked for us, and I mean, there's a million different jobs.
So like the Army paid them, like for the goods of the services they were able to provide.
Yeah, either they were getting directly employed by the military, or mostly through contracting companies is typically how it works. So these guys were contractors. And like I said, they were, pretty much just supplied us with all the materials that we needed.
Was it safe for them at that point to work with us?
Fairly safe. They would come on base every day, but they would go home at night. So, they're driving through unsecure areas. I remember at one point, one of the other Afghans that was on base, came and talked to us one morning, and his brother that had worked with him had been murdered the night before by the Taliban on his way home. So I mean that, it's a risk if you're an Afghan and you work with the United States and you have to go home at night, it's a major risk, not knowing what's going to happen to yourself.
Did you get a chance to meet their families as well?
So Abdul Muhammad's families I didn't meet until they got here. I guess spoiler alert. We'll get into that. But no, while I was in Afghanistan, I never met their families. I just met Abdul Muhammad.
You mentioned a good bit. I'm glad you brought up the food, because you mentioned a good bit in the book. This is like the best food you've ever had.
It's so good, man. And so Abdul Muhammad live about 30 minutes from me now. So typically every like Sunday night, sometimes I miss a week, but I go over there for Afghan dinner, and it's my favorite day of the week.
Being a kid from Michigan, what was it that surprised you sort of about the connection you made with them, the friendship that you built?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you grow up in the U.S., it's hard to imagine the type of environment that these people live in, right? Because we're obviously very spoiled here, and you see it on TV, and you see it in movies of the way that these people live, and they have nothing. And so to be able to, meet them and interact with them and just learn more about their culture, and just learn like these are amazing people that are so humble and they come from nothing, and just like us, all they want is to provide for their family and keep their children safe, right? It's pretty simple. And unfortunately, the United States, put them in a position where they potentially weren't going to be able to protect their family. So obviously, Abdul and Muhammad are very lucky that we were able to get them out. But over 100,000 of our Afghan partners that worked with us, that stood shoulder to shoulder with us for 20 years of war, ended up getting left behind, unfortunately.
Thought I had a good question. Was there any concern that the Afghan interpreters or the people, Abdul Muhammad, they were possibly insurgents on the side? And I imagine trust at first is hard to establish.
Yeah, it is. When you first get there, you're a little weary of just about everybody, right? You're just kind of always watching people. I think it's just like any type of relationship. Over time, it develops. And I quickly learned that they were just amazing human beings, and just wanted to be my friend.
So I want to flash forward a bit, because eventually you left Afghanistan, and that was a bit before the withdrawal and how everything started to collapse and Taliban started taking over. Give us an idea, like maybe an overview of like after you left, how did you stay in touch with them, and what were you sort of up to that point?
Yeah, I think one last thing I should say while I was there is it was a very interesting time to be in Afghanistan in 2019 and 2020, because that's when the Doha agreements were getting inked, right? So United States is negotiating directly with the Taliban, and unfortunately, the Afghan government essentially got left out of those negotiations completely, which was, hindsight's 2020, but that was a huge mistake. So yeah, I left Afghanistan, and actually, sorry to go back one more time. I remember right before I left, as the Doha agreements were getting inked, one of the contractors came up to me and he was like, "Sergeant Cook, you guys have to stay. Like, if you guys don't stay, we are all going to be slaughtered." And it's like, I'm a staff sergeant in the Army. Like, I have no power, obviously, over whether the United States leaves Afghanistan or not. But it just hit me later on that like the Afghans had 2020 sight, right? They knew exactly what was going to happen when we left, and we were the only ones that couldn't see it. So I left, went home. Me and Abdul stayed in touch on WhatsApp, and communication kind of was intermittent, I guess, as the years went on. But then in summer of 2021, when the Taliban started taking over territories, is where our communication really picked back up.
And what did it increase in intensity from them?
Yeah, so they ended up, so the Taliban, I mean, they took over the country very quickly, right? Like 5-6 days. I mean, it wasn't more than a week, which I guess is a good point to say. It was a huge intelligence failure on our part, right? Because CIA, NSA, all of our intelligence agencies, they were all coming out with different reports on timelines of how long the Afghan National Army would be able to hold the country. But they were anywhere from 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, indefinitely. A lot of the agencies said, they might take the perimeter outer cities, but they'll never take Kabul. well, they took the entire country in 5 days. So huge intelligence failure on our part, obviously. But yeah, intensity grew quickly as the Taliban was coming closer to Kabul. So Abdul Mohammed, once the Taliban took over Mazar Sharif, which is up in the north, like I said, they fled down to Kabul where they had some family and they were hiding out. And that's really where our communication picked up, and we started looking for options to get them out.
And what time frame was that?
That would have been probably late July of 2021.
2021.
Or early August, maybe.
So I'm thinking like that at HKIA, the international airport, there was staff shortages, and I'm thinking like this was around COVID time, right?
Yeah, it was summer of 2021.
So we weren't able to put as much personnel to that airport as we wanted to or could.
Sure. So we when we took off from Afghanistan prior to that, pretty much took everyone out except the embassy, people that were working at the embassy, and a small contingency of troops that were protecting the embassy. So, getting into some more failures, we gave up Bagram, which anybody that's been to Bagram knows it's probably the most strategic place in all of the Middle East, all of Asia for the United States. It's kind of right there in the middle of everything. Very good security, multiple working runways. So to give that up was a head scratcher, because then we had to run the evacuation out of HKIA, which is a civilian airport. So you can imagine the security is just not there. It had one working runway. So it was an inferior option. So like I said, it's just a head scratcher as to why we gave that up. The other problem with giving Bagram up is the Parwan detention facility. So the prison was at Bagram. So that's where we kept all the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS people that we caught. So when we handed that over to the ANA, all those prisoners escaped. So, the bomber that actually detonated his suicide vest at Abbey Gate and killed 13 Americans was in that prison when we handed it over. And since we had the botched handoff to the Afghans, that prisoner escaped and ended up killing 13 of our troops and about 200 Afghans.
I unmuted Dave Seaver here because I know you were at Bagram for a time, correct?
Yeah, I was at Bagram from January to July of 2010 during the surge.
Oh, wow. Yep.
Yeah. So a lot different place back then.
For sure.
Communication was different. Everything was different. I when I was there, we moved just over 5,000 patients through the AE system. I had a crew from my squadron go in 2017, and in basically the same kind of time frame, 6 to 7 months, they moved 450 some patients.
Wow.
So the tempo of combat, the war slowed way down.
Yeah, I mean, back then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say Bagram hosted like almost 100,000 troops. Does that sound right?
Oh yeah, they were.
Wow.
They were sleeping on, they have litters on the MRAPs. They were sleeping on litters under the MRAPs.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I left in 2020, there's about 2,500 to 3,000, to put it in perspective. So it's just a ghost town.
Yeah. There was 30,000 when I got there, and it just blew up after that. So yeah, it was huge.
Wow.
So if for thinking about this in sort of Pittsburgh terms, would it be like Bagram's like Atlanta International, and then HKIA was like Allegheny County Airport?
Yeah, probably.
That's fair. Yeah.
Incredible. Let's see, Bob Flays, you had a question here in the chat. After we left, did the Taliban have a bounty on the contractors? And if so, were they in danger of being turned in by non-contractor neighbors?
Yes, absolutely. It's still happening today. So trying to think of where I want to go with this question. There's everyone that worked with the United States, even today, is still being hunted and slaughtered in the most inhumane ways possible. I'm sure a lot of people here have read about all the, billions of dollars of equipment that we left there, including biometrics. So the Taliban got our biometrics, and I believe we're able to essentially figure out, who worked with the U.S. and who didn't. But yeah, they're going neighborhood to neighborhood. Essentially, they're grabbing people up, putting a gun to their head and saying, tell us who worked with the Americans in this neighborhood. And they're just going, they're unfortunately raping wives and children. They're kidnapping, they're slaughtering people. I mean, it's the most horrific situation ever that's happening. And unfortunately, my two friends have lost a couple friends in the last few months because of that.
Rona in the chat said, did men such as yourself, Michael, boots on the ground at the time, did you have a sense of how quickly the Taliban would gain control of the country?
No, I had no idea. I don't think, I would like to say, I don't think any of the Americans had any clue of how fast it was going to go. I mean, like I said, the Afghans knew. It just wasn't something I was thinking about, right? I was focused
You were
on
already stateside.
I was doing my job and then just focusing on getting home, and then I was stateside, and I was following closely. But when the CIA tells you that the Afghan National Army is going to hold out for a year, you like tend to believe that they're going to hold out for a year, right? You don't think that the Taliban is going to sweep across the country in 5 days and take over everything.
You don't shy away from the brutality of what was going on at HKIA. Maybe get to that in just a minute, but can you give us a lay of the land at HKIA? Like 2-1 Marines show up. What's the situation as everything has started to collapse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so 2-1's there, 1-8 is there. There's some forces from the Army. I mean, there's forces from just about everybody there. But it was really 2-1 and 1-8 that got the assignments to watch or oversee all the gates. So there's the main gates that were operating were North Gate, East Gate, and Abbey Gate, which is obviously where the bomb ended up detonating. But from all the Marines that I interviewed, just complete chaos as soon as they touched the ground. Oh yeah, here, great picture. Thanks for bringing that up. So at the top left there, you have Glory Gate. That was a CIA ran gate. That's where all the, anybody that was being brought through by the CIA or the White House was getting through there. You have North Gate at the top right, that I believe 1-8 was working. East Gate, I think 1-8 was working. And then Abbey Gate at 2-1 was working. But just complete chaos right off the bat. So these guys are getting off the plane. The airport has been breached on all fronts. So there's civilians all over the terminal, all over the runway. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the videos of, the Afghans holding onto the C-17 as it takes off. And once the C-17 retracts its wheels at a few thousand feet, these people just fall down to the tarmac. And, there's horrible videos of that. And I think that alone just shows the desperation of these people. Is like they're holding on to an airplane because that's a better option than living under the Taliban, right? Like when you hold on to the wheel well of an airplane, you're not going to make it, right? And that's the desperation that these people were feeling. So it was just complete chaos. And unfortunately, there just wasn't a real solid plan to move people fluidly through the airport and get them onto planes.
So you're at home here in the States and you're getting these text messages. How did you get involved in this? Like I said in the beginning, you weren't there physically, but all of a sudden you were quite involved in the entire process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, these were my friends, right? Like, what would you do if your friends called you and asked for help for their lives and their families' lives? Like you would do whatever you had to do. So I was sitting downstairs at my house at my kitchen island, and I was sitting with my mother, and Abdul FaceTimes me on WhatsApp. And I remember him holding his baby daughter, who was maybe 1 or 2 at the time. And this is right as the Taliban's like on the doorstep of Kabul. And I remember like my mother having to step off the screen because she just started crying because, she knew and I knew that this little baby girl who's 1 or 2, her life is over at this point. She's never going to have a job. She's never going to go to school. She's never going to leave the house without a male escort. She's never going to leave the house without her face covered. Like her life is completely over. And I just felt so helpless. And that's when, Abdul started talking about the special immigrant visa program, commonly referred to as SIV. So he had done some research into that to see if he qualified. So for anybody that doesn't know what the SIV program is, it's essentially a promise that we've made to all our local allies. So whether you're from the Iraq War, Afghanistan War. If you're an Afghan and you work with U.S. troops for a certain period of time, I want to say it's 2 years, then we guarantee you safety should anything happen. So that's the promise that we made to these hundreds of thousands of Afghans that worked with us. Unfortunately, it was an empty promise, or led to be an empty promise. But Abdul had done some research into what he needed to do to qualify for this program. And man, Sean, it was, as an American English speaker, it was incredibly difficult. So for an Afghan that maybe speaks a little English, or most certainly can't read or write in English, it was impossible, the paperwork that these people had to do. So they were just completely set up for failure right off the bat. But I do remember I reached out to my local senator, Debbie Stabenow here in Michigan, and asked for help. And she was great. She wanted to help. She wanted to help expedite these visas. But unfortunately, even our local congressmen and senators were set up for failure by the State Department as well, because the guidance that they were getting from the State Department was, okay, have them go shelter at home, wait for their visas to get processed. And when their visas get processed, we'll call them and we'll tell them to come to the airport and get on a flight. Well, here we are 3 years later, and Abdul and Mohammed still don't even have case numbers from their SIV application. So obviously that wasn't going to work. And I think that's just kind of the point where I realized that we needed to find a different way to get into the airport and get on a plane.
So the two Marine units, they show up and they had to push everybody back. They had to clear the tarmac and clear the airport, the terminal, and create a perimeter to.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it was a classic, catch-22 moment for the Afghans, because here they are trying to get out of the country, but in doing so, they're shutting down any evacuation operation because we need to get security at the airport, right? We can't have planes flying in and out when there's thousands of people standing on the tarmac. So yeah, the first task was just getting control of the airport. Somehow we ended up partnering with the Taliban. So I mean, you can see pictures of our guys standing shoulder to shoulder, like literally inches away from the Taliban, working on security. So why we trusted them, I don't quite know. Yeah, here's a great picture from my book. So you can see, I want to say that's actually some British paratroops down at the bottom. I don't think those are Marines, but then you can see the Taliban standing on top of the shipping container there. So this is a picture that one of my friends took from the sniper tower at Abbey Gate.
Rules of engagement where they couldn't do anything either. All the brutality that was happening, the Taliban was putting people and civilians through there at the gates. Marines, their hands were tied.
Their hands were tied. There was very, I want to say the clarity on the ROE was very vague, is what a lot of the guys said. I mean, a perfect example is Sergeant Vargas Andrews, who was, he lost a leg and an arm in the blast, but he was in the same sniper tower that we're seeing this picture of. And he got intelligence from a psychological operations unit that they had intel that the bomber, that there was a bomber, that he was coming to Abbey Gate. They had a description of what he was wearing and who he was going to be escorted by and roughly what time he was going to be coming through. Sergeant Vargas identified a man that fit this description. He was wearing exactly what they said he was going to be wearing. The time matched up. He was being escorted by an older gentleman, just like they said. And he got confirmation from one or two psychological operations team that they believe this was the target. He called over the battalion commander, the 2-1 battalion commander, to get permission to engage the target. And the battalion commander said, "I don't have that authority and I don't know who does." And, hearing that from a battalion commander of a Marine Corps infantry unit is infuriating to me and just about everyone that was there in that situation. Because Sergeant Vargas obviously is like, "Sir, what the hell do you mean you don't know who has authority?" So battalion commander disappeared. Sergeant Vargas tracked this man for about 2 hours before he got lost in the crowd. And then shortly after that is when the suicide vest detonated and killed 13 of our troops.
Before that happened, before the attack, you're in constant contact with Mohammed and Abdul, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, constantly. I mean, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, I literally was doing nothing but just had my head buried in my phone, just trying to communicate and create a plan with them.
These were hours that went by, days that were going by. And
Mhm.
a lot of times communication was difficult because the military was sending out a signal to disrupt any electronic communications in that general vicinity, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So we had jammers, obviously, just to try to prevent a signal attack, right? Like a suicide vest phone call attack, essentially. But that messed with our communications. So any call that got through was just so important because you didn't know when it was going to cut out or how long it was going to last. And the first attempt that we made at the airport was pretty unsuccessful. Abdul Muhammad kind of stumbled their way to Abbey Gate. I didn't lead them there. I didn't know anything at this point. And they got roughed. They ran into a Taliban checkpoint. Muhammad got beat up pretty bad. When I saw him a few months later, he still was covered head to toe in bruises. But luckily, there was just such chaos and so many people that he was able to escape into the crowd. So they ended up, trying to make their way through Abbey Gate. But every time they wanted to talk to me, they had to, rebound back like 100 yards just to find phone signal. And obviously they lose all their progress. So it was it was a real tough day. I want to say their first day, they were out there for 12 hours and
with their family, not just the two of them.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Their wives, 5 young kids, all under 8. One of them was a newborn baby. And, the other thing to remember is this is middle of summer. It's blazing hot. And they're standing in sewage runoff, knee deep sewage. So it's just a incredibly demoralizing day. And I remember I got a text at the end of the day from Abdul, and it just said, "Brother, can I take this time to go home and hug my family?" And I was like, that just like hit me so hard because I'm here safe in my house here in Michigan, and just again felt so helpless. That because I knew that he couldn't quite comprehend as to why I couldn't help him. Right, I'm a non-commissioned officer in the U.S. Army, and then he's standing 20 yards away from U.S. troops, and I can't do anything to get him in. Right, so that was really tough. So I said, "Yes, go home. I'm going to do better. I'm going to find a different way to get us in this airport." And that's really where, they go home. And that's when I took to the internet and was able to make all these connections with this digital Dunkirk network is what it's become.
This is huge. This is a big part of the book, is this digital Dunkirk. The first time I had heard about it was when I opened up the book and started reading. And it makes perfect sense if you know anything about Dunkirk, which everybody here does. But please, tell us about what this was. This was like a movement online. You were able to get so much done just by communicating with people who were like back channels.
Yeah, it was incredible. So at this point, the digital Dunkirk network had been up for a while, and I mean, there's a lot of different like creators, I guess you could say, of the digital Dunkirk network. One was my good friend now, Chris Davis, and Tom Schumann, who had been working on getting Tom Schumann's interpreter. So Tom has a book out called Always Faithful, if anybody's heard of that. It's an amazing story that everyone should read. But they started because they were trying to get Tom's interpreter out. And it just grew into this huge network of veterans. And, I mean, there's everybody in there. There's veterans, there were civilians, there was CIA case officers, there was congressional staffers, just like everyone that had any, say in their life in Afghanistan, like people that cared about Afghanistan or spent time there. So it's just a bunch of people that came together.
Was Scott Mann a part of that as well?
Yeah, Scott Mann was. He had an organization called Pineapple Express, or a mission called Pineapple Express. He's got another great book. I want to say it's called Pineapple Express. And
I bring it up only not to push another book during the
yeah,
program.
please no.
But I had Scott Mann on our podcast a couple years ago, and everyone here, I'll put a link in the chat to that conversation. It sort of is like a sister conversation to the one we're having tonight, because it's Scott had released this book a couple years ago, and him and I talked about this. So I just wanted to bring that up. Go ahead, Mike.
That's great. Yeah, no, I'm happy to hear that. He's an amazing human being, and he saved a lot of people. Let's see, where was I? What were we talking about?
So digital Dunkirk, and we have all of these people online, civilians, generals, everybody is sort of working this back channel, this sort of underground railroad to find ways to get who they can out in time.
Yeah, so it was just a real ad hoc group of people that came together with a common goal. And it was just really incredible to see, how much we were able to get done. Because like individually, we brought very little to the table, right? Like I showed up to this group and I had two names. I had Abdul Muhammad, but collectively, with all the people in the group chat, we realized that we had so much information. We knew exactly who was working what gates, what the State Department was requiring for entry into the airport at that time, what gates were open, what rat lines were being worked by what special forces unit or whatever. I mean, we had a ton of information. So just
in real time too. You were getting it before anybody.
Yeah, I mean, we were getting the suicide bomb threats. I remember 2 hours before the bomb went off, I got a notification on my Signal chat that there was a suicide vest en route to Abbey Gate at that time. So, I mean, for us to be getting that information and, just the failures all around of just not protecting our troops was just so mind-boggling to me. But yeah, that was tough. But yeah, I mean, just when I got into that group chat, I remember just sitting back and just watching to see what I entered, and the information being passed was just amazing. So I knew at that point that, I'm probably in the right spot and I can probably figure it out from here.
I was going to ask you, because you mentioned him in the book, and I thought people might be interested to hear about Air Force Major Jared, I'm going to mispronounce his last name, Lafavre?
Yeah, Lafavre.
And what made it, this is just a side note for people, what made him so special?
So he was a PJ, and he had actually been on HKIA for like a month already at this point. So he had a really great layout of the airport. He knew exactly where, all the great entry points would be. And he was very useful for the evacuation of one of Chris Davis's and Tom's interpreters, Lucky, and was able to get him out. But I mean, I forget the number, it's in the book. I want to say he was credited with saving like 200 something lives during that week in August. So just an incredible human being.
And a Marine, Air Force, and Army aviator.
Yep. He was in Air Force, Army, and Marines. Pretty incredible.
Yeah, I've only heard of two, so I didn't know if anybody here has heard of somebody serving in all three. He just needs Navy, but
yeah.
So how Muhammad and Abdul, this had to be excruciating. And as a father of two, I can't imagine what they were going through. And we do reach a point in the book where they are able to actually get through the first gate, because there were two gates that they could get through and then have to be vetted and then get through the second gate. And they actually were able to get through the first gate, but what were they met with?
Yeah, so we got them into the airport a first time, and I kind of had a premature celebration because I thought we were done. And so the Marines brought them in. They got escorted to the State Department, and the State Department kicked them out because they didn't, they were only pending SIVs and didn't have granted SIVs, which again, today, 2024, they still don't. So that was very demoralizing. And it was just right back to the drawing board. But it was the next attempt that they ended up getting out on. So at this point, we're on like day 6 or 7 of them spending all day fighting through the crowds at Abbey Gate. And it's just like, to set the scene a little bit, the most horrific environment ever. I mean, there's I talk about it in my book, there's mothers that are so desperate at Abbey Gate that they're literally throwing their newborn babies over 12-foot T-walls, just hoping that there's an American on the other side that's going to catch them and take them to safety. And unfortunately, there was multiple times where the baby didn't make it over the wall and got stuck in the sea wire, and there was just no way for anybody to get to them, and they just bled out there. So there's that. I mean, people are getting trampled to death. One of my friends that I interviewed for the book watched a 4-year-old boy just get stomped in Abbey Gate and ended up drowning, because I mean, there was just so many people that there was nothing that these guys could do to help anybody. People were just getting crushed, and it was just the most horrific scene that they've ever seen, and all of them are scarred by it. So it's the moral injury that these guys received just working at the gates was horrific.
No doubt. How are you eventually able to get them through and finally get them onto a plane?
Yeah, so on the final attempt,
and you're talking final, we're just saying like the final attempt, because the Taliban pushed up the due date.
Yeah, right. So the Taliban put out essentially a notification to the whole country that if you wanted to get out, you had 12 hours left. And that wasn't our timeline. They still technically had like 3 or 4 days, but the Taliban changed that and said you have 12 hours to get out if you still want to get out, or if you qualify to get out. So they were on their way home when I got that information, and I called them. I was like, you got to go back right now. I know you guys are tired. You've been there all day. You have no food or water with your babies, but you have to go back right now. And they ended up going back, luckily. And after another, so many hours of fighting their way to the front, they finally make it up to the front of Abbey Gate proper. And it was just like, it was a miracle, honestly, because again, with the jammers, they should never have been able to get a phone call through. But somehow I get a phone call on my like actual phone number, not on WhatsApp. And it's Abdul. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I answer it. And I can hear him, but I can tell that the phone's not to his face. Like the phone, I can tell the phone's at a distance because I can hear him screaming. And he's yelling, talk to the sergeant, meaning talk to me. So I can tell he's talking to somebody. And then all of a sudden on the phone, somebody answers and they say, Sergeant Zelensky, United States Marine Corps. And I just like dropped and quickly introduced myself and just told them, hey, these guys are SIV applicants. I have them manifested on flight Cam Air, whatever the tail number was. Can you please help me and get them in? And for some reason, Sergeant Zelensky thought that I was on the ground there because there was Army there. And I was just like, brother, I'm not there. Like, I need you to do this for me. And, he didn't hesitate. He's like, I got you. I'm going to get them over to state right now. And then the call disconnected, and Abdul Muhammad went dark for probably 3 hours, and I was obviously freaking out. And then I got probably the greatest text that I've ever received. Was a picture of Abdul Muhammad and their families wearing State Department bracelets, meaning they had made it through and were safe. So that was amazing.
That had to be the most excruciating 3 hours of your life.
Yeah, it was tough, but it was probably the best moment of my life as well when they got out.
They unfortunately had to leave behind Abdul's brother, Masood, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Is he still alive? Did they know what happened to him?
Yeah, he's alive. He is still living in Kabul, just kind of hiding out like the majority of people in Afghanistan. But he's alive and well as of now. So he didn't actually work for the Americans, so he's relatively safe, I think. But he's, he obviously wants to come here, but he doesn't have any pathway to citizenship at this point.
There's a couple different organizations that you mentioned in the book. One being a patrol base Abate.
Patrol base Abate.
Abate.
Yeah, that's an amazing veterans organization that I'm a part of. It's essentially an organization for anybody that served. So it doesn't matter whether you've deployed or whatever. If you've ever raised your right hand to join the military, you're welcome at Patrol Base Abate. And it was created by Major Tom Schumann, who I talked about, the author of Always Faithful. And he's an amazing human. And it's just a great place for military members to come together and connect. Great organization that I recommend everyone checks out.
And also Save Our Allies. Was that part of the Digital Dunkirk movement?
Yeah, so Save Our Allies was, if anybody knows Chad Robichaud or Tim Kennedy or Nick Palmisano, they were want to say, let's see, Tim and Nick were Army. I want to say Chad was in the Marine Corps, but they actually took it one step further, and they got planes and flew into HKIA and were bringing people out themselves. Chad has a book called Saving Aziz, another amazing book on the same topic. But yeah, they were instrumental in just helping me get my guys manifested on a flight, because I knew that to get into the airport, I would have to have them manifested on the flight. So Nick Palmisano was the one that helped me get that done.
I wanted to share this. This was something you shared with us, a picture that this was an actual conversation taken screenshot from your phone.
Yep. So Abdul, I had him just constantly sending me pictures so I could try to triangulate where he was, because I was, talking to people on the ground that were trying to find him. So, you can see he's just so close to U.S. troops in these pictures. Unfortunately, at this time, the gate was closed and they weren't accepting anybody. But you can see how close he was, and they just still weren't able to get in.
And was this his family?
So this is actually the Pyman family, which is a follow-up story to all of this. This was a third family that I ended up evacuating after the evacuation through Mazar Sharif. Very short story, I guess, is Senator Blumenthal arranged about, I think, 2 flights to get out of Mazar Sharif, and luckily he gave me 5 seats on the plane. So this is actually the family of a U.S. Army service member that I served with. He's an Afghan, grew up in Afghanistan, moved to the U.S., became a translator for us, and then ended up joining the U.S. Army afterwards. And I served with him. And this was his family that was stuck in Kabul that we were able to get out in October of 2021.
That story, most of the book takes place about Abbey Gate, the attack that happened. And this is sort of like a separate after the last plane left. This is a little bit extra for those of you who are listening in.
Yep.
Which was Mohammed and Abdul on this particular flight, or is this a like a general picture of the refugees on a plane?
No, they weren't. This was just I think just a great picture. Obviously way over capacity. So just, commend the pilot on this one, because he had to make the decision that they were way overweight and he was going to take off with these people anyway.
That was the first C-17 out right there, because it came to Qatar where I was.
Yep. So there's about 700 people on this plane.
823. Somebody actually counted all the heads.
Wow. Okay. That's a good number.
And I mean, for those of us who may not understand, like that many people on a plane, I mean, obviously very dangerous. That creates enough weight that it would be unsafe to fly.
That's what I had heard. I had heard they were way overweight, and the pilot had to make a decision. And he chose that he was going to get these people out. Now, I don't know anything about airplanes, so.
And I actually looked it up. So the biggest airplanes in the world hold only 850 passengers. Because I looked it up for this program. Yeah, it was way, way overweight. Way, way overweight.
You can see kids with bottles.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that strikes me so hard, is that these poor little kids who just know nothing but fear in this instance. They don't know anything. They just, their parents are grabbing them in panic and chaos. And to get them out, it just destroys you.
So can I address that for just a second, Sean? Is that all right?
Yeah.
So that was the first aircraft out. That's the one that you saw rolling down the ramp, and there are people climbing all over it and around it. And the truth is ugly. They crushed to death dozens of people getting down the ramp. And once it gets up in the air and you see the bodies coming off, it's not because they couldn't hold on any longer. It's because the limb trapped in the gear door severed. They're whipping around in the breeze, and once that limb severed, that's when they came down. My crew had to walk the runway at Qatar and pick up the pieces.
Man, Dave, you gave us some perspective here before the program began about just how large this airlift was, and I know we are focusing on failure, but I think it's remarkable to consider what you told us, which is this is the largest humanitarian airlift in history, evacuation airlift in history. 123,000 people by
Right.
plane. When you think that one plane could hold at most, 800, the that's an overwhelming number of flights.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a constant stream of C-17s going in and out of Kabul. This plane obviously was the exception, 400 to 450 people on board them. And the air crews had to fly them, they have to have crew rest. That's mandatory. I sent you the picture of our Pittsburgh bird, but it wasn't necessarily a Pittsburgh crew flying that plane. If there was a plane and a crew available, it didn't matter where what base the plane was from or what base the crew was from. They'd point them to an aircraft and say, go fly it in.
I unmuted Ben. Ben, you were a part of the fall of Saigon.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I did airlift of refugees out of Saigon in 75.
Was your plane ever that full?
Well, we had about the max you could stuff sardine style in the back of 130, but a 130 is a lot smaller than a C-17. But we typically had 220 in the back of the aircraft. But we just put cardboard down on pallets and straps across. They had something to hold on to. But he was talking about C-17s. You start out with a dry weight of the aircraft, and then you got to have enough fuel to go somewhere, and that adds the weight. And then takeoff data is also includes the pressure, altitude, the temperature, the winds. So there's a lot of factors that go into computing takeoff data. As whether if you can get airborne in the available runway at the weight you are. And, if you disregard, if I lost an engine, that I would no longer be able to take off or stop either one. If you just assume that all four engines would continue to run, then that gives you a whole lot greater ability to take off.
For a man of faith, that's, put your faith in the engines working, right?
Sure, or nothing going wrong. And
right.
Like say, if you've got people jamming up their landing gears and all those things, those are all factors that affect the aircraft and a takeoff roll.
Boy, oh
Ben,
boy.
can you give me just a sense of your mindset during that refugee crisis and getting down into the airport, loading up, taking off again, the chaos that it must have felt like?
Well, it was pretty organized for us. I mean, the embassy, controlled who got on the aircraft, and we taxied in and shut down the inboard engines and opened the aft ramp and door. And they just pulled up the buses and the people got off, and when no more people could get on, then we closed the aft ramp door and we taxied out, started the other two engines while we were taxiing, and we were gone. But we were paying attention because we were more concerned about SA-7s, the shoulder-fired anti-aircraft munitions, the missiles, and 23 millimeter anti-aircraft. So we were more concerned about the threat from the North Vietnamese troops that were very close to runway than we were what was going on the ground. But I knew after the fact that getting into Tan Son Nhut and the embassy and everywhere else was absolute chaos. But it was pretty well organized. In fact, our wing commander was the organizer on the ramp, and it worked well.
I encourage everybody else here. There's a lot of chats here, also questions. We will definitely get to them. We'll be taking our station break here in just a minute. If you have any thoughts on that evacuation of Kabul, or the evacuation in HKIA, the attack, or the evacuation at Saigon, please feel free to chime in here. Michael, I want to get back to you here for just a minute, because there's some pictures that you sent me of the family that how are they adjusting to life here in the States? What was it like seeing them for the first time after this really harrowing experience for not only their family, but for you as well?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It was amazing. The first time I got to see them was down at Camp Atterbury in Indiana. I drove down to see them. That's where they were being held before they were released. And just obviously just gave them a big hug. I was just so happy to see them. And at that point, just my whole community had come together and raised a bunch of money and just bought a bunch of material things that these people would need. So I'm just so thankful for everyone in my community for supporting these families. But this picture here is at my house, I think last summer, and it's just a picture of all the kids from the 3 families. We had a little get together, and it's just been so special getting to watch these kids grow up, and they're finally just now speaking fluent English, which has been so much fun for me to finally really be able to communicate with them. But honestly, I'm looking forward to the day where they're old enough to just really take in the story and just understand what their parents did for them to create a better life for them.
You adopted 11 kids.
Yeah, kind of. Christmas is pretty big now. And then this is me with Senator Blumenthal. I want to say a year after the evacuation, and he was gracious enough to give me some time to come in and talk just about the SIV program and current situation in Afghanistan and what's going on with the National Resistance Front uprising and currently fighting the Taliban. So got to spend a little time with him, and he's a big supporter of our Afghan allies. Unfortunately, one of the few that's still kind of pushing the boulder uphill to create a pathway to citizenship for these people that, like I said, stood shoulder to shoulder with us for so many years and got left behind.
One of the questions earlier in the chat was, is there a network trying to get people out still?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton. So a lot of smaller NGOs were formed during the evacuation. A lot of them have now combined into larger NGOs. One would be Moral Compass Federation, great organization of a whole bunch of smaller NGOs that are still working on helping Afghans get out, as well as just working with all the troops that served at HKIA and just making sure they're taken care of and making sure that the KIA's families are taken care of. So that's a great one. Uplift Afghanistan is another one. I mean, if you just Google, you'll find a ton of them, of people that are still trying to help.
We have this.
This is so I was just talking about the National Resistance Front. This is Commander Massoud. For anybody that's seen the movie 12 Strong, the horse soldiers that deployed into they're the very first troops in Afghanistan right after 9/11. Those 12 horse soldiers deployed into Mazar Sharif, and they worked with a man named the original Commander Massoud. He was called the Lion of Panjshir, and he was the leader of the Northern Alliance. So the Northern Alliance, they're the ones that fought off the Russians, and then they fought off the Taliban when we first entered into Afghanistan. And the original Commander Massoud was murdered by Al Qaeda on September 10th, 2001. So the day before 9/11, because Al Qaeda knew that Commander Massoud was going to be kind of the United States puppet in Afghanistan. So they want to get rid of him. This is his son, who has now taken his position and is leading the National Resistance Front in Afghanistan. So they're the only entity that is currently engaged in active combat against the Taliban currently. So this, I got invited to go and spend some 3 days with him and the NRF out in Austria last summer. And I was just very impressed by him, and a very educated man. And I truly believe that he wants what's best for Afghanistan. He wants to free his people. So I hope one day our government will ally with him. But as of right now, they have not.
I'm going to take a minute here to get back to our take our station break. Thank our sponsors. Michael, thank you for this story. I hope that you stick around, because I'm sure there's other questions and thoughts here from our group.
Sure.
But first, let me go ahead and pull up my share here. I want to go ahead and thank Tobacco Free Adagio Health. They are dedicated to reducing tobacco use, and they are there to help in the event that you do want to quit. You can check out their website, tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org, for all of their programs, or you can call their popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They obviously want to talk with veterans, who is a large portion of the population that smokes. So if you're looking to quit, please check out Tobacco Free. They're there to help you. Also, I'd like to thank UPMC for Life. They have a program that is by veterans for veterans, and you can contact them to find out all the benefits that you have that you can get for being a veteran. And they want to save you money, so make sure that you contact them if you are looking to do that. And who doesn't want to do that? But you can do that at upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. UPMC for Life. Thank you so much for supporting the VBC and for being a part of our programs. We have a quarterly magazine that is free. It is free. It goes to your mailboxes. If you don't get it, it's because we don't have your address. So please give us your address in the chat or send it to Todd or I. You can do that at Todd, TODD, at veteransbreakfastclub.org, or just replace Todd with Sean. Send me the address. We'll make sure to get you a copy. This is our special summer edition, Masters of the Air. It is covering a lot of what we covered on our Thursday night programs. Some amazing stories we have heard throughout the year that are brought into this summer magazine. So make sure you get a copy. Todd just put a link to our survey in the chat. We'd like to hear what everybody's thinking about our programs. So we always put the survey into the chat. You click on it. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes to complete. We look at these very closely. Just want to know how we're doing. Programming that you're looking and that you're watching. We want to make sure that we are providing the best programming possible for all of you night in and night out. Todd, I want to jump over to you real quick and see if there's any questions that you have come up with.
Yeah, before we get to the questions, I do want to say we have an unusual program coming up on Thursday night. This is about the Electoral College, how the Electoral College works. I'm a historian. I have a fascination with the Electoral College. Greg Yost is a historian and political science expert. He has a fascination with the Electoral College. We were talking about that we should collaborate on something dealing with the Electoral College, but we thought, geez, is it relevant to the Veterans Breakfast Club? And we finally figured, well, yeah, this is how we choose our commander in chief. So we're going to do a conversation about the Electoral College, and I'm not sure if you can see my screen.
Those weren't working. That's why.
They weren't working.
No, they didn't pop up.
All right. So we're going to do a program on the Electoral College, and it's going to be mainly, Q&A conversation. With an opening with how it works. We're going to do that on Thursday night, August 22nd at 7 p.m.
Thank you, Todd. Michael, there's been, I could tell absolutely just looking at the chat that there's a lot of anger about this. And I can tell just sort of listening to you talk, there's a lot of bitterness. I want to...
Sean, yeah, that is so. Thank you for bringing this up, and I'm sorry to step on you for this. I jot down often when we have guests. I jot notes down, and especially adjectives. The sense that I'm getting from our guests, from the story that we're hearing. In one column, Michael, as you were describing your relationship with the interpreters, I wrote admiration, love, and in the other column, as you were talking about the evacuation and the United States culpability for the takeover of the Taliban, I wrote betrayal, disillusion, outrage, shame, grief, anger. I wrote other things too. But I think part of the pain of hearing your story, Michael, is hearing that grief in your voice and that sense of disillusion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, as an American that served in the military and loves my country, you want to think that we're better than that, right? So when we drop the ball so heavily, it hurts so bad. And, again, as an American, it's like if we make a promise to our Afghan allies, you better freaking keep it, right?
Yep.
Because, like I said multiple times, they were right there in the danger with everyone. A lot of these Afghans that got left behind were in way worse situations than I ever was. So there's tons of people that deserve protection that were left behind.
Dave Seaver, you spoke a little bit last Thursday about your experiences. Could you remind people what your role was during the evacuation?
Yeah, so I was at Al Udeid Air Base in the country of Qatar. If you want to say it properly, it's actually pronounced Qatar. You put the emphasis on the first syllable. So my job, I was the medical operations flight commander. So all patient care was under my purview. So in the med group, I owned the primary care center, the ER, the patient ward, and the ICU. Well, when we started getting all these refugees in, I owned the medical care for them as well. I think I told you last week, the original plan was, July 28th, aircraft there's the patch I had made after it was all over, and I gave it to every one of my medics.
And you can see it says Qatar, Operation Allies Refuge. We did the impossible with the inadequate.
Yeah, we didn't have enough of anything. And they just kept coming. So we just kept opening up facilities, and my leadership had come to me and be like, okay, we're opening up this facility. Yeah, that's 120,000 square foot warehouse right there. And then you have and there's the aftermath. That was one of 9 facilities that I had to man 24/7. Thank goodness the Army, I believe it was 10th Mountain, had some medical troops there. Our air medical evacuation squadron that was there when they weren't flying, they were able to help us out. I don't know where they came from, but one day I walked into, it was this facility, and there were a couple of civilians in there taking care of people. I'm like, who are you? And they were German doctors. I don't know where they came from, but I was happy to have them because we didn't have enough of anything. It's an expeditionary force. The med group is intended to treat the base population. So what's the base population? Healthy adults, basically. So one of the things we ran into quickly, and Sean, you pointed this out, all the little kids and babies on the aircraft, we had nothing for them. So that's Wyatt Schuler. He's a tech sergeant now, but entertaining a couple of the Afghan kids. But we literally instructed our medical logisticians to go into Doha in civilian clothes, go to the grocery stores, and it's almost like the cartoon where you see the guy pushing the grocery cart and having his arm just scooping stuff off the shelf into the grocery cart. They were literally doing that in all of the infant supplies aisles. And it kind of led to almost a diplomatic issue because the Qataris saw our loggies doing that. So they thought, oh, well, something's going on, so, like toilet paper during COVID here. So then they started panic buying. So it really put a pinch on infant supplies in the city of Doha for a while. So yeah, there's one of the C's, and I didn't even think about, I was so busy the first few days because we were just reactive. This was probably a week and a half in. We were finally able to get cots and things into these hangars. After 4 or 5 days, you have to contract. So, initially we didn't have food, we didn't have water, we didn't have porta potties. And there's my group from Pittsburgh that was there while we were, while this was going on. So the rest of them were out in the air medical staging facility, and I got stuck in the med group doing a job that I was not familiar with, but had to become very quickly to, basically run a med group. So these are tents that were put up eventually by the Qataris. It's just, those were big, huge white tents. They look really great on the outside, and on the inside, they had just laid pieces of carpet over the dirt. That's all they were. You can kind of see the truck.
Wow. Oh,
yeah, go back to that. But you can kind of see the truck there. So eventually they started bringing in halal or, culturally, religiously appropriate meals for them. And off to the right, I didn't ever get a picture of it. They also set up their little field hospital, and they requested that we man it for them. Because that's just what happened. I won't get into that, but yeah. So we wound up manning the Qatari field hospital, which is what provided medical care for these facilities. So these are some of the Army troops that they were sending into HKIA. They're laying out, it's probably 125, 130 degrees. They're just under this big, it's like a steel fabricated, prefab building, but it's just the roof. There's no walls. So one of the things I did, I actually had 2 tents. One, we had set up for treatment, and one we had set up as kind of an admin waiting area. So I took everything out of it. It had an air conditioner. So I hunted down their NCOs or their officers and said, see that tent over there, 25, 30 guys at a time, however many you can fit. That way they can go in, they can cool down, take a nap. You determine 30 minutes, an hour, whatever you determine. So just let all these guys use those tents to get a little relief from the heat while they were waiting to go in country.
Wow.
There's the flight line on any given day. You can see it is just chaos out there. You see the Humvee there. Our security forces were spread so thin that we had at one point 1 security forces person per aircraft. So they had 1 security forces person out there trying to keep a handle on 400 or 500 people. We weren't able to get everybody into the hangars or into warehouses right away. It wasn't realistic to keep them on the aircraft and try and keep it running. So they just let them outside, and they would sit in the shade of the wings and the tail of the aircraft until we could get them into a facility.
Man, oh man.
It's that bottom headline that's important there, because that's the one that got some folks in trouble. Social media is out there. Honestly, we were never ever supposed to have refugees stay on our base. The original plan was they would come in little groups at a time, be processed, go on down the road to Camp Osalea, which is run by the Army. And, obviously that plan went out the window real quick, the first aircraft. But I forget the date. This was like a week in, and, people are working their 12-hour shifts and then going and volunteering another 6 or 8 hours somewhere else just to help out. It was, sorry.
Yeah, it says this is an article. I could imagine that there was some blowback about this. An article about social media posts.
Right.
Been doing this 12 to 16 hours,
Yes.
No days off since it hit the fan.
Right.
Now, I love the fact that I'm helping people, and I wouldn't know what to do if I was in their shoes, but I just want some real rest because I'm shutting down slowly. I'm really tired.
Yeah. And it was, we were taking people out of Afghanistan so they were physically safe, in the sense that, they weren't going to get shot. They weren't going to get blown up, that way. But, we're taking them out of, like I said last week, 90, 95 degree heat into 125, 130 degree heat, and they haven't had food and water for days.
Mm-hmm.
So my claim to fame and what I'm proud of is nobody died.
Mm.
Yep. Hey.
Every one of those 58,000 that came to us survived and were able to go on to the next level. We were, you said angry. We were angry because, we were the ugly baby. So we weren't in the press. And, up the road, 6-hour flight up the road in Germany, they had 3 days to prepare so they could set up tents and they could bring in food and water, and they got all the press. And we're sitting in Qatar going, hey, what about us?
Oh, boy.
Yeah,
Dave and Michael.
That was frustrating.
Susan asks a wonderful question and makes a good point. 2 wonderful questions here in the chat. One is, and I want you, Dave, or Michael, to answer this. Where did the people who were evacuated, where were they ultimately sent? My understanding is that the U.S. has taken very few people. Is that correct?
No, we've taken a lot. I don't know the exact number, but essentially the path was you either went to Qatar or you went to there's one other lily pad site. And then, so my guys went to Qatar.
Kuwait got refugees. They got about 10,000 at Ali Al Salim.
Okay. So my guys went to Qatar. Then they were there for a day. They were in and out. And then they went to Germany. They were there for 10 days. Then they went to DC. They were there for a day. And then they got posted at Camp Atterbury in Indiana. And they were there for a couple months. So they kind of got, my understanding is a lot of them got posted on all these like National Guard and reserve bases all over the place, just as holding facilities until they got sponsored by a refugee organization that could help them get out and, get
Fort
their
McCoy,
applications
Wisconsin
processed.
was a big one.
Yep.
Lieutenant General Jerry Martinez is on. He's the Air Force general, retired 32 years with the Air Force, spent a lot of his life in Afghanistan. Jerry, since you are the ranking officer here tonight on this Zoom, I'm going to throw all the frustration, all the grief, all the outrage that, is getting expressed here in the chat and here online. Susan asked in the chat, and it's a good question, it sounds like an utter failure on multiple fronts. Who is responsible? Who's responsible for not planning this better? General, do you have an answer?
Yeah. So, when you look at any type of conflict, you have an evacuation, you go, what is doctrine? Who is responsible for, is it a non-combatant, evacuation? They call them non-combatant evacuation operations, NEOs.
Yeah.
The State Department is responsible for a NEO. That's bar none. That's the line. Now, if Jerry Martinez was ever president of the United States, the very first executive order I would write was, let's stop the fallacy that the State Department can conduct a NEO. Okay, because they can't. They have absolutely no ability to conduct a NEO.
Dave Seaver's clapping right now.
Even in Japan, where I was the commander of U.S. Forces Japan, North Korea was shooting a lot of missiles over us. There was a lot of discussion, if we go to war, are we going to do a NEO out of South Korea, and would we do a NEO out of Japan? And, the State Department, please don't take this as a criticism of the individuals. Every one of them that I've met want to succeed and they want to help. But here's the bottom line. They have zero capability to conduct a NEO. And so what usually happens, it's an added layer of bureaucracy that frankly just makes the situation worse. That if they had just said, look, let's quit pretending we have to be interagency and that we work well together and everything's perfect. What the government ought to do is, if there's ever a need for a non-combatant evacuation, they should certainly coordinate with the U.S. ambassador of that country. They are the president's representative. They need to be in the know. They need to be a part of everything. But in the end, this comes down to the only people that can do it, and that is the Department of Defense. They've got to go in and everything from security to airlift to logistics, coordination, the things that, that you hear David talk about, that you don't see on the televisions is when 10,000 people land, where's a blanket for? Where is just a bottle of water? Okay. A simple bottle of water that we take for granted, that we just go in the hut and grab some water. When stuff like this happens, there's nobody that really can produce that kind of logistics and do it except the Department of Defense. And so I think the interagency of trying to make everything, so copacetic between the two, in my mind, slows it down. It adds a level of frustration and bureaucracy. And again, I've met, and I lived in the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. There are none of those people that didn't want to give 1,000% and do what they could for their country. And I mean, I met a lot of them. I knew a lot of them. I lived with them. It's not the individual. It's the bureaucratic way we've set this thing up. So, and then you go, was this a non-combatant evacuation? Well, it started out, it looked like one, and then we had a bunch of Americans killed. Is this non-combatant? A non-combatant meaning the people that you're pulling out usually. But how do you define that when the medium shifts to hey, we're going to get the citizens out of South Korea before there's a war, to we're already in a war, the airfield is surrounded, and we got to get people out of there. And so this was complicated. And, I won't repeat and rehash everything I said in our last session, but where I stand on this. I was horrifically disappointed in many layers of our nation and our country for allowing this to go this way. And in my mind, it was because of politics. It wasn't because of DOD's capabilities or the State Department's capabilities. Is that we worried more about a date, that we want to have people out, bar none, so that we could have a political victory. And then we allowed this to happen. And, if we had left again, I hate to be the Monday morning quarterback, but if we had just left a little bit of glue in Afghanistan, the structure would have held. And the whole idea that I told you before, and for those that weren't on this last time, that we were in this massive war. You hear President Biden saying, I ended the war. In 2015, January of 2015, the mission changed to the Resolute Support Mission. It was no longer ISAF, the Assistance Security Force, International Security Assistance Force. It was no longer an ISAF NATO mission. It was a Resolute Support NATO mission. And the charter of the Resolute Support was to train, advise, assist. That's what they did. Now, you have some soft guys that are always out there doing stuff. And so I don't want to pretend there weren't any bullets flying anywhere. But at large, in the masses, we weren't in a war. And so this became politics. And when politics get involved in this is what happens. We repeated Vietnam.
And it sounds exactly like Vietnam. Go ahead, Dave.
I will say this, probably day 2, day 3, I was just getting crushed with refugees.
Yeah.
And I knew by then that the State Department people were in the building, and I literally marched on them. And I marched up to a person who was a very high, because I knew they were. And I said, look, this is your operation. We're getting crushed. You need to help us with medical coverage. And I got this.
Yep.
And the next day, I could no longer talk to the State Department people. I had to go through this Navy commander, 05, just like me, and he was my liaison to go through to communicate with the State Department. A few days later, I checked my cell phone, and I've got a message, voicemail from somebody in Virginia. So I listened to it, and it is a State Department attorney wanting me to put them in touch with our JAG at All You Need so that they can do some sort of contract to help us out medically. And I'm like, really? I didn't even return the phone call, because at that point it was just moot.
Yeah, it's too late. Yeah.
They eventually sent medical people to provide medical care for State Department people.
Yeah. Well, for those that we were talking about earlier, I see our time, we're about out, so I'll talk quick.
Yeah.
I'm a C-17 pilot as well. And that plane is designed to hold 102 people. It can hold 138 if you put centerline seating in. Well, it's palletized seating instead of like this centerline that we can hold the 102 people. And the number of people that were on that airplane, I'm going to tell you, that was an amazing feat for those poor load masters, especially in the back. The load masters are the ones, the pilots, we got the air conditioner on, and we're going to models and get on that. Those enlisted back, those load masters, to have to live with that and deal with it, I just can't even imagine the chaos on a plane. It's called floor loading. It's an emergency procedure. And I flew C5, C-17s, 140. I flew them all, 130s, and landed on all 7 continents. And I never had to floor load once in my career. It's not something that's done very often. So what an incredible show of just bravery and support. And, that's one of those times when you're operating limits of the aircraft, you trust the aircraft commander to make good, safe decisions, but they don't necessarily have to be exactly by the book. It's the situation dictates something a little bit different.
Wow. And that's just what Bob von Bargen put here in the chat about that. Loadmasters are the heroes of the evacuation.
Oh, yeah.
Bob Flage.
Oh, yeah. All the way.
Good. Wars are for things to be settled where politicians screw up. That's not the best quote I could make, but this Afghanistan is Vietnam all over again. And I can't explain how bad I felt seeing that after experiencing Vietnam. But going back even to World War II, you look at our politicians that were involved with getting how many Nazis did we bring into the country. These guys came in like they were refugees. They were brought in. They were protected by the FBI, CIA, whatever. And, so this doesn't surprise me what's happened. We've got a history of screwing over people, unfortunately, after we've made a mess of things.
Thank you, Bob.
The abandonment of those people, that is soul crushing for me. You have to have been there and known these interpreters and known these cooks, and there were servers and there were drivers, and the Afghans were all over, and we were paying them more money than they would ever make, working on the Afghan market out there. And, I'm not joking. I didn't meet not one that just didn't want a good life. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about supporting an ideology. It was, I just want to feed my family and I want to have a decent life. And they worked incredibly hard, and they trusted us, and we left them. And to me, that's just utter
Criminal.
irresponsibility and criminal, that we just did not. We were so worried about a date. What we should have done is just shifted the date. Government does it every damn day with our budgets and everything else. Just shift the date and get control of the situation. My 2 cents.
Yep.
Justin?
We'll leave when we get all our people and our equipment out.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you don't leave them behind.
Justin Miller in Dallas.
Well, good evening, gentlemen. Michael, first question I had was, did you see in your tenure in Afghanistan any what's the word, where the army we were training in Afghanistan was not committed to?
Yeah, I think I know where you're going there. Sure. Yeah. You have guys kind of, I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about our military. You have guys that really want to be there. And those are the guys you can count on. And you have some guys that don't want to be there, and they're just there for a paycheck. And those aren't guys that you can rely on. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely that, probably more to an extreme in the Afghan National Army than in our forces. But absolutely, I mean, you have guys that you definitely trust, and you have guys that you're keeping an eye on for sure.
Chris Perolo, I think you have the last word, or at least the last question.
Gentlemen, I want to leave you with a parable. You may have heard it, some of you, but here's how it goes. There's an old man standing on a rock above a shoreline, and there was a terrible storm the night before, and there were tens of thousands of starfish on the beach. And down on the beach was a young man running through the starfish and flinging each one of them into the sea one by one. And the old man yelled, "Son, why do you do this? You can't save them all." And the young boy said, "I know, sir, but I can save this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one." Take solace in what you did, pride in what you did, and this goes for all the people involved in doing the right thing. And that's carrying on the spirit of the American servicemen, and that is to help the weak and to be strong for those who cannot be. Thank you.
Well said.
Wonderful parable there, Chris Perolo. I remember reading that or being assigned it in high school and reading that, the Star Thrower. Sue Watson, did you have a question? You have an X on if you wanted to ask something. All right.
No, I'm good. Thank you. It's awesome program.
Sue, I'm going to see you tomorrow morning at our breakfast in Bethel Park. And if anybody here is in Western PA, if they're around, would love to have you. We're meeting at the Christ Church on Highland Road in Bethel Park. I think we have 155 reservations for this event. This will be one of our Veterans Breakfast Club storytelling events. I very much look forward to it. Sean will be there. I'll be there. Ben Wright will be there. So it'll be Sue Watson will be there. So we will have a good time. Thank you so much. I know I'm stepping on Sean here, but thank you so much, Michael, for joining us, and Dave Seaver and Jerry Martinez. Thank you for sharing your insights into this episode that really should be remembered.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, everybody. Really, really appreciate the opportunity.
Nice words, Michael. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Todd, real quick, are you able to put up that picture of the CCAT patient in the dock there?
Oh, yes. Let's see.
I got to brag here for just a second. This is one of my squadron mates from the 9/11th Air Medical Staging Squadron here in Pittsburgh.
All right, let me see if I can get this. I'm doing a little here. I know. I'm doing a little. I think, is this the? Nope. Hold on.
Nope.
Hold on. I'm doing a little experiment. This will be the last time I do this experiment with my screens.
While Todd is doing that, make sure you check out the chat, everyone. I put Michael's link to his book here in the chat.
There it is. Okay. So That's what a critical care air transport team patient looks like. You can't even see the patient for all the equipment. That's what critical care, although it's in the ICU at LUD, that's what they look like at 35,000 feet. The gentleman on the right there, his name is Raul Montiague. He's a lieutenant colonel. He is an anesthesiologist in civilian life. He lives in Michigan. He drilled with us in Pittsburgh. And he is the only physician in the Air Force to have a Distinguished Flying Cross, because he flew some very hairy missions picking up casualties out of HKIA, including, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is actually one of the victims of the bombing at Abbey Gate. And that guy, he flew in there day in and day out. And the last night, you know, when we pulled all our troops out, he and a medical crew were in a C-17, and they just orbited over HKIA. And, you know, they let our troops get out of there peacefully. But if something went down, that medical crew was going to go in there and start scooping up the casualties and getting them out of there. And he was on that flight.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you, Michael. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.